Morning, sixth graders. As you can see, today is a classroom day. So on the day that I'm filming, it is a beautiful sunny day outside, and I'm planning on shooting quite a few videos today, and we're in the classroom. So I might even be shooting some out in the courtyard, depending on what's going on. If you hear Miss Doyle screaming in the background, I'm sorry, that happens sometimes. I just want to let you know where we're at, right? Today's Tuesday, May 12th, and we had a day off yesterday, kind of. One of those flex days that we're starting where you're going to be exchanging your packets and you're not going to be getting any new content. So the reading guide that we assigned on Friday would be due today. Hopefully you got that through both the video and the instructions. And I also want you to remember, I didn't really bring this up on Friday, because I did say it, but I didn't like show it to you. Remember, we're in our new core knowledge book now, right? And this is a beaster, right? The Making of America, Immigration, Industrialization, and Reform. Yes, I just read that backwards on a screen. Awesome. Now, it looks massive, okay? And I want you to know that we're only going through one particular section. And I'm not going to open it for you and show you, but if you look on the page numbers of your reading guide, those are going to be the page numbers that you're required for. So I think there's like 100 and okay, so there's 241 pages of actual text in this book. You're going to have like 80, maybe not even that much with how distance learning is going and scheduling. So just don't freak out. We'll get through it together. The nice thing is that you actually don't have a reading guide for today's assignment. So we're going to get right into it. You're actually just taking notes today, though you are going to need those notes for your next quiz. Now remember, notes, yours to keep. Though I like to see that you're taking them. Like when you turn them in, I'm not upset to see that you've written on them. But the second you turn notes in, you don't get a grade, and then you don't have the ability to use them anymore, okay? So just remember that. Keep your notes. All right, let's knock over my coffee. All right. Full screen my computer. Go to the screen. We're good there. And looks like that's going to be going on for a little while. So we're on May 12th. Hopefully you looked at the warm-up and you know from what we talked about in the video and your reading guide exactly what Andrew Carnegie was given access to that other children weren't. And we will bring this up probably in this video when we're going through the notes. When we're done, do the exit ticket, and then you're done. Perfect. All right, last time I had some issues with this, so I'm glad that's fixed. All right, so today we're going to talk about the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, right? How we went from a world of pure farmers to a world in which hardly, like before it was like 80 to 90% of people were farmers and they grew whatever they could to survive and they do minor trade, to like now in the United States, only 1% of people on this entire country list themselves as being full-time farmers. Okay, so how is that possible? How are we able to go from having almost everybody have to grow their own food just to survive to have 1% grow everything for the rest of the 99, right? That just seems ridiculous. And really, it all lies in technology, okay? And we'll talk about specific ones, but it's the fact that technology starts to improve and that the techniques used are allowed, or not allowed, but they allow for people to get way more with way less work. Okay, so what's revolutionary about this, right? Well, it changed the way that people worked. It changed the way that products were created, used, and how much they cost. And really, if you want to think about it, you have the era of doing basically everything by hand or by animal, right? Like if you pull the plow on a farm field, usually it would be some sort of draft animal like a mule or an ox or maybe even a horse. And now we're looking at power-driven machinery. And really, it goes through a couple of phases as to how this machinery actually works and what it's powered by. If you want to think about what power-driven machines you use in your everyday life, go ahead. But honestly, I think you could write down a list of like 100 things and you probably still aren't even scratching the surface. I'm using one right now. I just used one when I hit this key. All right, so causes. All right, so we have what's called the agrarian revolution, right? Agrarian means farming. So once again, I know the word revolution seems way, way, way overused, but it just means a sudden change, right? And there were some techniques that caused this new agricultural revolution. And because of that, it allowed for less people to grow more food. Food became more readily available and it became more cheap. That's the other thing, right? If something is easier to get your hands on, it's not going to be worth as much because it's easy, right? The demand goes down. So cheaper food allows for people to have more kids. And then after that, they end up finding a way to harness energy. And what do I mean by that? All right, so one of the first things that we're going to see are machines that are going to help farmers plant things. Like this is Jethro Tull's seed drill. And rather than having to dig up by hand, put seed in, put it all back down, this seed drill pushes the soil out, will plant the seed automatically, and then it'll have a blade that comes up and pushes it and covers it, right? It's going to make it like 100 times easier for a farmer that can stand and just push the thing as opposed to bend down, open, drop, push, stand up, open, drop, push, right? Just by hearing it, it sounds like it's a lot more work. So this machine, among many others, I'm not saying that this machine alone did it, but this machine is an example of things that started to really increase the amount that the average farmer could produce. Next, we have what's called the enclosure movement, right? And so we've got a whole bunch, and this is not necessarily a good thing for a lot of people. There are people that are very wealthy and they own a lot of land and they have a lot of money to burn. So what they do is they offer for smaller farmers, say, hey, I want to continue to grow my farm. It's working really well. I can efficiently grow more stuff. So I am going to buy it from you. I'm going to give you some money. Now, here's the problem is that those farmers that were originally there, the small farmers, well, what do? I mean, they could maybe work seasonally for this wealthy person, and that's what a lot of them did. But unfortunately, a lot of times that wasn't enough to feed their families. So in a lot of cases, now you have all of these small farmers, which there are a lot more small farmers than big ones. All of a sudden, they're out of a job. So we need to start finding things to do so that they can feed their families. And then another thing that they figured out was called crop rotation. And what happens is that there's certain crops that when you grow them, they take the nutrients, it's nitrogen, out of the soil. And then there are some crops that actually, when they grow, they put it back in. In the United States, the perfect example is corn and soybeans, right? In Minnesota, those are big crops. So some years you'll see farmers grow corn, which takes nitrogen out of the soil, it removes it. And then you're going to see maybe after 2 or 3 years of corn, they'll do a year of soybeans. And the soybeans, though they sell for money, are really to make sure that their soil doesn't run out of that nitrogen, because once it does, it's gone. You can't use it anymore. So their hope is that if they do this crop rotation, they can keep the same land producing and at a high rate. All right, as we said before, this leads to population growth, right? You have a surplus, it becomes cheaper, you can buy more, you can have more kids, okay? But also, we're seeing another issue. The poor farmers are starting to move into the cities. Cities were already there, okay? But there weren't a whole bunch of jobs there, but there was at least the hope of something, right? And that's enough for people to try to give it a try. Now, we do have a human numbers through the ages video that I watched with my students last year. We ended up watching that last week. Okay, we watched that on Friday. So we're not going to watch that again. But the population growth goes big time fast after the Industrial Revolution starts. Okay, so energy. Beforehand, you do everything by hand. Then eventually people said, oh my gosh, if we can tame these animals that live around us that are like 20 times stronger than us, we can actually get them to do our work for us. Well, eventually, with the amount of people that needed work and the amount of goods that needed to be produced, even animal power wasn't enough. And what ended up happening is people first started looking at harnessing the power of running water in rivers. Now, after that, you'll see, I'll post a video probably either today or tomorrow that'll talk about that energy revolution. But first, water works pretty well, right? A river runs, turns a wheel that's put into there constantly, and then you can get a machine that turns, and as long as the river continues to flow, you have constant power. But that's one major problem there. Anybody know what it is? That means you can only do anything that's on a river. If you're off of a riverbank, you don't have access to that type of power. So people are like, what can we do to create a source of power that'll allow us to develop things off the bank of a river? And what ends up happening is, kind of by accident, they fall into this idea of this thing called coal and how it could provide some power. Now, we talked about this way back in our ancient Greece unit, that the ancient Greeks were the first ones to come up with a steam engine. It didn't do anything, it just sat there and spun. But eventually what people realize is that if you take a steam engine, when it burns the coal that it uses and you hook it up to something, you can actually power that machine. Now, in the beginning, the very first steam engines were so inefficient, they could only be used for really, really small tasks. And in the end, in 1769, about, guy named James Watt comes up with this steam engine that ends up being way more efficient, and people can use it to power factories, and they can power a whole bunch of different things. And as long as they have the supply of coal, they can build it anywhere, right? And that is where this revolution is really going to take off. If you're thinking about your exit ticket and you're wondering, what was it that ended up causing the biggest change in the Industrial Revolution to make it go as fast as it did, to take off? It's the ability to use coal in the steam engine, right? Now, there are some negatives to that, right? But for the Industrial Revolution to really take off and for life as we know it today to start to develop, it was using coal in steam engines. This is James Watt's steam engine. So what ends up happening is, I'm going to take the cursor here. So we're going to start here down in this small area, and you're going to be burning the coal, and it's going to push this piston up and down. This is going to be the steam that's going to be coming from burning that coal, okay? And once it pushes the piston up, it's going to start these mechanization of levers. And as long as you have steam going in here, pushing this valve up and down, the rest of this machine, I want to point, I know I can't do that. The rest of this machine is going to keep operating up and down, okay? Mr. Lamprecht could do a way better job telling you about potential kinetic energy. For my purposes, what I want you to know is this. This machine allows for work to be done at a much faster rate anywhere. With more work comes more products, and with more products comes for the ability to buy them. This right here is going to start changing things from everything being produced in someone's little farmhouse to every single type of good being produced at a crazy fast rate, very, very cheap. Now, the only problem that's going to come out of this is where do we send them, right? So we've got this new ability now to produce things really, really quick. But unfortunately, the problem ends up becoming, well, who cares if we can't get it to people who can't buy them? And eventually what ends up happening is we take this idea of coal powering a steam engine that sits still to putting that steam engine on wheels, and then start having that move along these things called rails. And it'll bring these products far and wide in huge quantities to a whole bunch of areas very, very quickly. All right. I'm pretty sure I gave you a good hint on what we're doing tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm just noticing, looking at myself, my beard's getting a little bit out of control here. I apologize for that. But have yourselves a great night. You do not have a reading guide due tomorrow, and we will see you then. Bye now.